I knew the storm had landed when my badge didn't work on the north entrance. It was 6:42 a.m. on a Wednesday. My routine was clockwork. Park in the same spot, coffee in hand, greet the guards who knew my name without needing to check a clipboard. But that morning, the little green light on the scanner didn't blink. Nothing. Just a cold red flash, like a middle finger from the system I designed. I tried again. Same result. Then my phone buzzed. HR, 17th floor, ASAP. I took the stairs. Up 14 flights, every landing echoing with the realization that something had shifted, quietly but deliberately. I wasn't naive. I'd felt the tremors for weeks. The new hires with vague titles, the whispered meetings behind frosted glass, the subtle tug of realignment language in weekly memos. Still, I'd thought I was safe. I didn't play politics. I made the damn building run. That was my mistake. Before I go any further, if you're still listening, take a second to hit the subscribe button and like this story. It helps more than you know. 97% of folks never subscribe, but it makes a huge difference to the team. All right, back to the fire. When I walked into the conference room, the air felt refrigerated. Kendra Fulton was already seated at the head of the table, flanked by two men in charcoal suits and a bored-looking security guard who couldn't have been older than my nephew. Kendra didn't smile, didn't even nod, just glanced up from her phone and said, "Please hand over all company property. Security will escort you out after you've signed." I stood there blinking like a fool. No preamble, no acknowledgement of 6 years building their disaster protocols, running point during the hurricane floods of 2021, securing the archival lab when a disgruntled engineer tried to leak classified vendor data. Just a canned line, as flat and soulless as the frosted glass behind her. I didn't argue. Instead, I unzipped my jacket, reached into the inner pocket, and pulled out a heavy loop of keys, 11 silver tags and 1 red fob, matte and unassuming. I stepped forward and placed it gently on the glass table, not in front of her, in front of the older attorney to her left. He hesitated, then leaned closer. His eyes landed on the red fob. I watched his mouth move, just a small twitch at first, then a murmur to the other lawyer. Kendra tapped her nails on the table, impatient. That's when the older man whispered something to her. She froze. Her smile dropped for a heartbeat. Then, ever so slightly, her eyes widened. I had spent 6 years designing systems that didn't need me until they did. HVS overrides, emergency vault protocols, internal lockdown triggers. Everything ran smooth until someone tried to remove the wrong linchpin. Kendra's mistake wasn't just firing me, it was doing it without reading the facilities charter. Section 71C, buried in a document only 3 people ever bothered to sign, myself, the board chair, and our legal counsel at the time, outlined exactly what would happen if a key holder was removed without a board-reviewed transition. Guess what she didn't do? I turned without a word, walked past the guard, and let the door shut behind me with the quietest click I've ever heard. The kind that ends chapters. The kind that triggers something no PR team can spin. By the time I hit the sidewalk, my inbox was already pinging. Facilities alerts, server room errors, red flag triggers from temperature inconsistencies in Archive Vault B. The system was humming, loud, automated, and very, very alert. Everything was working perfectly, the way I designed it to. 3 years ago, after the 3rd infrastructure audit in 2 quarters, I pushed for an internal disaster failsafe. Something to keep continuity intact even in the event of executive failure. We called it Ops Lock. Technically boring, operationally bulletproof. It required physical key transfer logged under board approval. And the red fob? It wasn't a fob. It was the activation point for the lockdown protocol. And now it was on the table, still linked to me. I got in my car, started the engine, and sipped my still warm coffee while I watched the building from the lot across the street. I saw one of the security staff walk out with a confused look, badge in hand, staring at the scanner on the main loading dock as it flashed red. Again. What Kendra didn't know, what she hadn't been told in whatever MBA PowerPoint convinced her that new blood meant gutting out the foundation, was that this wasn't just about locks. It was about control. Transfer of secured infrastructure wasn't like flipping a light switch. It was more like disarming a bomb, slowly, with a manual and a board sign-off. She had none of those. And the building was responding just like I taught it to. They moved fast. Too fast, like kids with fireworks who didn't bother to check which end was the fuse. Consultants in Patagonia vests buzzed in with clipboards and startup swagger, talking about streamlining workflows and cloud-integrated access ecosystems. One of them, Bryn, or maybe Bren, actually told a building tech, "We'll be phasing out manual oversight. People like, well, that generation aren't built for scalability." I was standing 10 feet away when he said it. Week 2 was when things really started shifting. The badge access logs were being overwritten. They scrubbed old user IDs, deployed a new biometric scanner that kept failing in the Texas heat, and tried mapping HVAC through a mobile app that couldn't tell the difference between a conference room and the janitor's closet. I watched as they reprogrammed core systems, without any audit trail, without compliance sign-off, without realizing the minefield they were walking through in heels and hubris. The thing they didn't know? The master keychain they were so eager to toss into a drawer wasn't just a tool set, it was a trigger. Every tag in that unassuming red fob were hardware linked to the facility's critical zones. Vaults, server cages, environmental containment labs, even our storm shelter substation. And they weren't governed by software, they were governed by the charter. See, back in 2019, we had a breach scare. Not actual data loss, but close. Too close. Some hotshot exec had greenlit temporary third-party access to the archival vault for a vendor's maintenance review. That vendor had ties to a foreign firm flagged by the DOJ 2 months earlier. My team caught it. Quietly, no press, no incident report leaked. But that was the day I realized, if legal can make bad calls, then I'd better embed some protection into the physical chain itself. That's when Clause 71C was born. It wasn't flashy, just one page added to the facility's charter under the Disruption Continuity Framework, buried between HVAC emergency protocol and battery backup compliance. But that one clause required that any physical handoff of secured assets initiated by termination, not resignation, not retirement, had to be ratified by a quorum of the board. If not, immediate lockdown. And the master keychain? It was the trigger. The red fob wasn't decorative. It was custom-coded and signed by our internal infrastructure lead. Hardware synced to trigger a system-wide authentication audit the moment it changed hands. The moment they fired me and tried to take it without routing through the board, they essentially lit a fuse, and the fuse was live. They didn't read the clause. Or maybe they did and thought it was symbolic, like a plaque in a hallway no one looks at anymore. That's what happens when you replace people who know the bones of a place with people who've only seen the branding deck. They don't understand that systems have memory, and that memory is mine. By Friday afternoon, I watched from my apartment as badge access logs started failing in real time. Maintenance supervisors were being locked out of critical systems. The HVAC on sublevel 3 auto-reverted to emergency power, which wasn't dangerous, but would have ruined $2.3 million in sensor equipment if someone hadn't rerouted the exhaust manually. But of course, they didn't know how. They were still convinced I'd left behind a mess. No, darling, I left behind the firewall. One of the consultants tried calling me. His voicemail was painfully chipper. "Hey, we're just having a few hiccups on the facility's handoff. Some badge loopback issue maybe. No biggie, totally fine if you can't help, but if you have a second to point us to any system guides or whatever, that'd be amazing." I didn't reply, because those system guides were printed and notarized, filed in legal under the clause I wrote, in a drawer they didn't have the right to open. The minute they dismissed me without board ratification, the charter rules kicked in. The red fob remained coded to me, my biometric signature, my override clearance, my damn name still tied to the vault triggers. Their mistake wasn't hiring consultants. Their mistake was thinking keys are just metal. No. Keys are trust. Keys are contracts. Keys are signatures with weight. And the weight of mine had just shifted from asset to obstacle. Their problem now wasn't a missing operations manager. It was that they had broken the clause. And the building was about to remind them who actually built the walls. The glass table caught everything. The light, the silence, the sudden shift in air pressure when reality decides to punch through corporate delusion. I stepped into the conference room at exactly 8:01 a.m., like the summons demanded. No one offered a seat. Kendra didn't even look up at first. She was flipping through something on her iPad, manicured nails tapping the screen like she was scrolling through brunch options, not executing a career. 2 lawyers flanked her, one older, silver tie, trying too hard to look dispassionate. The other, younger, probably still thought NDAs were edgy. Off to the side stood a security officer, arms folded like he'd been watching too many procedural dramas. His badge looked newer than his shoes. Kendra finally lifted her gaze, eyes blank and bored. "Please hand over all company property. Security will escort you out after sign-off." That was it. No preamble, no transition meeting, no mention of my 6 years designing the very systems now locking them out of their own infrastructure. Just a line, dry and scripted, like she was saying thank you for your service to a barista who gave her the wrong milk. I didn't speak. Instead, I reached into my coat, the same charcoal one I'd worn during the hurricane lockdown drills, during the site rebuild after the archive flood, and unfastened the keyring from the inner loop. 11 silver tags, 1 red fob. I didn't toss it. I didn't slam it. I just walked forward and placed it gently on the table, but not in front of Kendra. I set it in front of the older lawyer on her left. The pause was microscopic, less than a second. But you could feel it, that ripple, the moment a room forgets who it's supposed to be afraid of. The lawyer leaned forward. His eyes narrowed at the red fob. He didn't touch it. He stared, like it might detonate. Then his head turned slowly to Kendra. He muttered something under his breath. I didn't catch the first part, but the end of the sentence hit the walls like a ricochet. About that board vote. Kendra's expression cracked, just slightly. Not panic, not yet, but that flicker of doubt. The kind of doubt that makes someone blink too hard, swallow too late, recalibrate the temperature of the room too slowly. She straightened up like that would help. "What's the issue?" she asked, still trying for calm. The lawyer glanced at me, then back at her. "Ma'am, she gave you those after you fired her?" "I'm following protocol," Kendra snapped. "She was non-essential. I don't need board approval to clean house." His lips tightened. "That's not accurate." The younger attorney tapped something on a laptop and slid it toward him. The older man looked, scanned, then stiffened. "Kendra," he said, voice low. "Clause 71C was embedded into the facility's charter. It's tied to physical asset control. Termination without board quorum voids operational handoff." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there, hands folded in front of me, while their voices wrapped around the room like barbed wire. "What does that even mean?" she asked, visibly irritated now. "She doesn't work here anymore." "No, but the keychains tagged to her identity as the last authorized infrastructure officer. And the red fob?" He paused, breathing slowly. "It's an active trigger for override review." "What kind of override?" "System-wide." Now she was blinking. "Then deactivate it." "You can't deactivate what you don't control," I said, finally. My voice didn't raise. It didn't need to. "And you don't have control, because you didn't follow the clause." The security officer shifted his weight, clearly unsure if he was supposed to remove me or salute me. The younger lawyer looked nauseous. "Kendra?" She stared at me like I'd spat in her mimosa. "I don't need this drama," she hissed. "You're dismissed." "I already was," I replied, turning toward the door. "And that's why you're about to find out what locked actually means." As I walked out, I heard the soft tap of her nails again. Only this time, she wasn't scrolling. She was trying to text someone. Too late. Behind me, the room stayed quiet. The kind of quiet you get when you realize the person you tried to erase is the same person holding the key to your vault. Literally. The first glitch hit at 8:47 a.m., 17 minutes after I placed the keys on the table and walked out. The main archival server room on sublevel 2 flagged an unauthorized credential override. Then the East Wing biometric scanner began looping badge errors for the entire infrastructure team. Climate control in Vault C dropped 3 degrees below spec. Not enough to ruin anything yet, but enough for the insurance sensors to file an automatic alert. 20 minutes later, the robotics lab down in R&D shut its lights off mid-calibration test. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't a virus. It was a lock doing exactly what it was designed to do when the wrong person tried to force their way in. Clause 71C had been drafted on a weekend after a particularly stupid facilities breach triggered by a C-suite exec letting her nephew into the clean room just to show him where Auntie works. I'd walked into a chemical spill and a 19-year-old in Yeezys trying to open a decon panel with a pen cap. That night, I stayed up with our legal liaison and wrote the clause line by line, embedded it into the facility's charter, and had it co-signed by the board chair under a quiet directive. This company protects its physical core, because if everything digital fails, the walls still stand. And those walls needed a lock no intern with admin access could override. The red fob was the lock. It wasn't fancy, just a matte red sensor tag with no branding, the kind you'd mistake for a luggage tracker or gym key if you didn't know better. But internally, it was the trigger, a biometric-linked asset transfer key. The moment it left my possession, specifically under termination, without board quorum, Clause 71C took over, and Clause 71C was ruthless. It cut access to all zones listed as continuity critical. The server vaults, the secure archival basement, the energy grid switchboard, the HVAC systems on levels 3 through 7, the satellite uplink, and, my personal favorite, the override panel in the executive war room, which I had rerouted 2 years ago after Kendra's predecessor tried to centralize emergency decisions. Kendra's fatal error: she didn't tell legal, didn't tell the board, she just printed the termination paperwork and tried to play queen on move 1. I could almost hear her voice from the 17th floor, panicked now. Why aren't the systems responding? Because you broke the damn agreement, Kendra. And in Oak Ridge Systems, the building listens to the rules, even when the CEO doesn't. By 10:30 a.m., the consultants were running around with clipboards like they were trying to herd a lightning storm. One of them sent me an email. Hey, not sure if you've heard, but there's some kind of facilities glitch. Could you just send over the architecture specs real quick so we can get ahead of it? I didn't respond. I read it while drinking coffee on my porch. By noon, an internal escalation chain had been triggered. Emergency flags were going off in the insurance compliance logs because equipment environments were no longer certifiable. Security called the archive lab team and asked why no one was responding to check-ins. One tech tried to badge into the HVAC corridor. The panel buzzed red and displayed a single-line message: Authority escalation required. See Section 71C. They didn't know what it meant, because they never read the foundation documents. Because people like Kendra, people who think power is granted by a title, not earned through consequence, always skip the appendices, the policies, the stuff filed by people like me in folders labeled "in case of idiots." The best part? I didn't have to do anything. No hacking, no interference. The moment she signed that termination order without proper legal routing, the fob registered the conditions as breach triggered. Not only did she not inherit my authority, she invalidated her own. Technically, Oak Ridge Systems now had no one legally authorized to override the lockdown, and that meant the red fob stayed hot. The only way to resolve the breach? Board ratification of transfer after the fact, which, by the way, required board approval to even get onto the agenda. And that meeting wasn't for another 9 days. I didn't set a trap. I built a system that didn't answer to panic, or power suits, or newly minted MBAs with God complexes. It answered to the clause, and the clause said, no authorized termination, no authorized transition. So when Kendra barked at legal, fix this, and they looked back and said, we can't, I hope, for one blinding second, she understood the gravity of what she triggered. Not a glitch, not a delay, a lock. And I was the last person who knew where the hinges were. By noon, the building stopped pretending. Badge scanners across the entire Oak Ridge campus started blinking red, like an allergic reaction to incompetence. Employees couldn't get into their labs. Maintenance crews stood outside locked utility panels with blinking tablets and no authority. Executives found themselves locked out of their own elevators. And somewhere, a $7.4 million climate-controlled archival vault began shifting into Phase 2 containment, which wasn't dangerous yet, but would become catastrophic if someone didn't reauthorize cooling within the hour. Spoiler alert, no one could. I sat at my home office desk, lights dim, coffee lukewarm, a muted security feed rolling across my second monitor. I wasn't watching for sabotage. I was watching my systems do exactly what I trained them to do: protect themselves when leadership failed to. You don't build physical infrastructure without contingency planning. You don't spend 6 years building command protocols into redundant sensor systems without knowing exactly what happens when the wrong people try to take shortcuts. You especially don't install your own biometric key into the foundational override schema unless you're damn sure of the fallout. And I had been. 3 years ago, after back-to-back power outages nearly compromised the vaults, I redrafted our internal disaster protocol charter. I worked with legal, risk compliance, and the board chair herself, Ellen McKinley, God bless her steel spine, to file what we called the last resort continuity lock. The language was dry, full of clause numbers and technobabble, but the trigger was simple: If a senior facilities officer is terminated without a compliance-reviewed transfer protocol logged and signed by the board within 48 hours, all continuity critical assets default to level 3 lockdown. We had never needed it until Kendra happened. She hadn't just skipped the legal routing, she didn't even know the clause existed. She signed off on my removal like she was canceling a magazine subscription. Probably didn't read past the first sentence. She wanted clean slates, shiny dashboards, modern energy, whatever the hell that meant in real terms. She wanted to prove she was CEO by clearing house fast. But she didn't fire a person, she fired a linchpin. The insurance systems noticed first. At 12:06 p.m., the policy governing our archival asset protection plan filed an auto-freeze due to unverified environmental fluctuations. Vault sensors flagged multiple irregular transfer attempts, probably some desperate techs trying to swap out memory arrays or pull logs before the containment kicked in. But without override access, every panel rejected them. One by one, doors stopped opening. Lights flickered in non-priority corridors. The executive elevator locked out level R, server access, and required a physical key no one had. I sipped my coffee and flipped through tabs. The logs looked clean. No anomalies, no breaches, just systems following instructions left in place for exactly this kind of moment. Instructions written by someone who knew that titles don't stop emergencies. Procedures do. A junior analyst from Risk pinged my consulting inbox, probably found it buried in the old vendor system I never fully removed myself from. Message. Hi, sorry to bother you. We're seeing unusual environmental trigger logs in Zone 3B. Is there a manual bypass or secondary escalation channel for FMLC sequence? Bless her heart for asking nicely. But no, there wasn't. Because Kendra had invalidated it. Clause 71C didn't just delay access, it retracted it, revoked escalations, made everything legacy gated until verified transition protocols were in place, and the only person who could trigger the shift to restoration? Me. Except I didn't work there anymore, and no one, not even legal, could call it a resignation, because I didn't quit. I was terminated. Illegally. Without process. Without quorum, without even an email to the board until the locks had already engaged. At 1:23 p.m., someone in executive ops tried to force an override on the HVAC master via hardline terminal. They triggered a sensor lockdown instead. Automated response flagged unauthorized manual escalation attempt, and the panel disabled itself for 4 hours. A recovery timer started on the screen, counting down. That's when I saw the security cams freeze on the 17th floor. For about 6 seconds, nothing moved. Not the monitors, not the badge lights, not the people, just stillness. They were realizing it. The freeze wasn't a malfunction. It was policy. They weren't dealing with a bug. They were staring down a charter. I built Oak Ridge like a living thing. Not flashy, not fast, but layered, durable, defensive. I had seen enough corporate burnouts to know that sooner or later someone with the wrong ego would walk through the wrong door and start yanking wires. And that day, I made sure the wires bit back. Because if you're going to fire the architect, you'd better read the damn blueprint first. Kendra didn't. And now, Oak Ridge Systems wasn't locked down because someone attacked it. It was locked down because someone tried to own it without understanding how it breathes. Tuesday, 9:30 a.m., and Oak Ridge Systems was supposed to step into the spotlight. Press kits were queued, investor decks polished, PR firms locked and loaded with embargo lift emails. They'd rented out a sleek conference suite in downtown Austin with designer water and chairs no one was meant to sit in for longer than a soundbite. All of it, the grand reveal of their $65 million expansion into biometric infrastructure, was scheduled to go live at 9:32 sharp, synced with a planned earnings bump and a wave of media coverage pre-arranged under NDAs and curated leaks. But none of it happened. Because Oak Ridge couldn't log in. Voice print verification failed. Twice. Kendra's credentials, uploaded only the week before, bounced back with a rejection tag. Authorization incomplete, Clause 71C exception in force. The server room, where the encrypted proposal and regulatory filings were stored, remained sealed behind biometric gates still synced to my access. No override, no workaround. Just red lights and locked doors. Kendra tried calling legal. Legal tried IT. AT tried praying. None of it worked, because all roads led back to a clause she never knew existed. Meanwhile, in a small rented office 2 miles away, I was calmly uploading a document packet to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Not out of spite, not out of vengeance, just protocol. I was no longer an Oak Ridge employee, but I was, thanks to a very real LLC filing 2 years prior, the founder and sole operator of Laurel Crest Consulting, a quiet little firm registered for post-employment compliance audits and systems oversight support. It had sat dormant, quietly maintained, paid for out of pocket, never mentioned in meetings, but fully documented, legally sound, and now activated. The SEC breach submission was clean. 5 attachments. A notarized PDF of Clause 71C from the Oak Ridge Disaster Charter, signed by the board chair and legal counsel dated August 14, 2021. A redacted termination notice sent to me, dated and unco-signed by the board. A digital photo of the keyring placed on the conference table. Time-stamped 8:03 a.m. System logs showing operational lockdown protocol had triggered due to non-compliant asset transfer. A signed statement from me confirming that, to my knowledge, no valid board ratification of said transfer had occurred. No commentary, no editorializing, just facts. And the facts pointed to a breach, not of cybersecurity, but of compliance, which, in the language of federal infrastructure expansion, is arguably worse. The SEC flagged it as a Category 2 incident within 37 minutes. Oak Ridge's expansion announcement was postponed due to technical difficulties. Reporters left without comment. Investors received no update beyond a vague press release about logistical recalibrations. The internal ticker paused. PR scrambled to coordinate a new narrative. But the real story was already ticking through the SEC's intake review system. And the name on the sender line? Not Oak Ridge Systems. Laurel Crest Consulting. Not that anyone had heard of it. Yet. Inside Oak Ridge, the fallout was ice water down the spine. Kendra had a choice. Acknowledge a clause violation and trigger a legal review with the board, or try to bluff her way forward and risk escalation from the feds. Her face, captured in one of the internal hallway cams that hadn't been shut down yet, looked pale, eyes hollow, as someone whispered the word liability. It wasn't just a delay now, it was exposure. And the exposure wasn't coming from someone inside the company, it was coming from me. The woman they walked out the door without a second glance was now the only person standing between Oak Ridge and an SEC escalation that could cost them 10 times more than my severance ever would have. And the irony? They could have just followed the clause. Hell, they could have asked. Instead, they tried to replace foundation with furniture. And furniture doesn't hold up when the ground shifts. It was Thursday morning when the house of cards officially started to fold in on itself. I didn't hear it from Oak Ridge directly, of course. I heard it from a third-party auditor I used to drink whiskey with after late-night continuity drills. He called me, not as a leak, just as a courtesy. The board chair's office flagged a non-routine compliance review, he said. Someone finally read your clause. Full legal unpack underway. Thought you'd want to know. I didn't respond. I just nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Clause 71C wasn't complicated. That's the beauty of good contracts. They don't have to be convoluted to be bulletproof. It clearly stated that physical transfer of continuity-critical infrastructure, if initiated through termination, must be reviewed, recorded, and ratified by quorum of the board. No wiggle room, no executive override, no wigged-out CEO waving her daddy's name around like a security badge. And if it wasn't, access defaults to lockdown. Period. I had written that clause on a Sunday afternoon in 2021 while cleaning up after a failed vendor transfer that almost cost us $1 million in compliance fines. I wrote it knowing damn well someone would one day try to skip steps for the sake of ego or expedience. I just didn't know her name would be Kendra Fulton. Now here we were. By Thursday at 4:10 p.m., a memo circulated through the Oak Ridge legal team outlining operations impact associated with Charter Protocol 71C. The wording was careful, non-accusatory, but the bottom line was simple. A $7 million freeze in insurance-backed operations, loss of system continuity reporting, and exposure to regulatory breach due to unauthorized asset reassignment. The board chair, Ellen, who once told me I had the spine of a wrecking ball in a cashmere wrap, reviewed the documentation personally. I didn't call her, didn't need to. They had the logs, the language was airtight, and I had said all I needed to say when I placed those keys on the table and walked away. By Friday morning, Oak Ridge released an internal statement. Kendra Fulton had stepped down for personal reasons. No press release, no boardroom send-off, just a calendar update and a quietly revised executive access log. She was gone. Just like that. The same way she'd tried to erase me. Swift, clinical, impersonal. Except I hadn't been erased. I had just been waiting. At 2:17 p.m. that same day, Laurel Crest Consulting received a formal inquiry through legal counsel. Oak Ridge Systems is prepared to reach an amicable resolution regarding operational impacts stemming from Clause 71C. Please advise on terms. I didn't send a proposal, I sent an invoice. $7,000 flat. Line item. Key transfer clause violation, Laurel Crest. No fluff, no bullet points, no explanation. They didn't argue. By Monday, payment was in escrow. No press, no public statement, not even a LinkedIn whisper. Just silence. And money. A friend of mine in M&A once told me, you know you've won when the other side stops using words. And this wasn't victory through revenge. It wasn't a speech or a courtroom drama or a dramatic email thread leaked to the media. This was me letting the system do exactly what I designed it to do. They fired the woman who built the walls, and the walls locked behind her. And now, they were paying to be let back in. 3 weeks later, the building I once walked through blindfolded was now a glossy shell of its former self, scrubbed, polished, and nervous. Oak Ridge Systems held its quarterly board meeting on site, a forced return to normalcy after the storm, the kind of performative calm executives rely on when they think time heals all embarrassment. Directors flew in. An updated security team was stationed at the glass doors. New consultants loitered in the hallway like deodorized bandages taped over an amputated limb. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. The hallway outside the executive suite had always been ceremonial, a marble slab inset with polished brass plates, each etched with the name and tenure of every CEO since the company's founding. No one looked at it much. It was more for show, a shrine to titles, a vanity wall dressed up as history, until someone noticed a gap between Raymond Fulton, 2004-2020, and there used to be another name, not anymore. Kendra's plate was gone. Quietly removed, no announcement, no replacement, just an unmarked space, freshly buffed, like it had always been that way. Like she never existed. They didn't need to say why. The staff noticed, though. You could feel it in the silence. The kind of silence that carries weight. A message in negative space. She made a mess, and the mess was expensive. And beside that wall, tucked onto a newly mounted acrylic placard listing Strategic Infrastructure Advisory Relationships, a new name had been added. Laurel Crest Consulting, Facilities Continuity and Charter Oversight. No photo, no quote, just text. Permanent as ink, unspoken as memory. A few directors might have recognized the name from the invoice, but for the newer ones, it was just a line item in the ledger. They probably thought Laurel Crest was a boutique legal firm. That was fine. Let them think whatever they needed to. The truth was simpler. I had become part of the building's operating system. No longer in it, but under it. Like the foundation they forgot to check before remodeling the roof. And the key, the red fob that triggered it all, permanently retired. Sealed in a steel box in my home office, along with the original signed clause, both now notarized and scanned into 3 separate encrypted backups. Not because I planned to use it again, but because symbols matter. A few days after the board meeting, a cybersecurity journal ran a piece called The 7-Mem Keychain Incident, Infrastructure Lockouts and Clause-Based Defense Systems in Mid-Sized Firms. My name wasn't in it, but the diagram of the fob was identical. They'd rendered it in glossy 3D, one red dot among a ring of silver, labeled simply, Trigger Asset, Revoked. I saved the article, didn't print it, didn't frame it, but I read it. Twice. Not for the praise, for the accuracy. Because somewhere buried in that write-up between the jargon and risk models was a single sentence that landed harder than anything else. In legacy systems, access isn't always about credentials. Sometimes it's about memory. Exactly. Kendra tried to control a system she didn't understand. I didn't fight her. I didn't argue. I just let the system remember. And now, in a hallway she thought she'd rule forever, the only trace left of her was a space where her name used to be. The building had moved on, but it hadn't forgotten. 6 months later, the rhythm hasn't changed. Every quarter, almost to the minute, I get the same soft ping in my inbox, a brief notification from the Oak Ridge Access Console, encrypted, signed with a legacy hash I wrote myself in the middle of a thunderstorm 3 years ago. The subject line is always the same. Sync check, legacy override deactivated, advisory input requested. No one from their new team ever follows up. No calls, no flagged messages, no escalation attempts. Just that one automated request, every 3 months like clockwork, reaching out like a nervous question whispered into a dark hallway. Are we still good? It's not an emergency ping, not an alert, just a heartbeat. A systems level courtesy built into the continuity framework under Clause 71C and its sister provisions. One of those lines no one bothered to delete after the board quietly locked Kendra's access and rebooted the structure under a new director of infrastructure. That person doesn't know me, but the system still does, and systems don't forget. The advisory input request isn't binding. It doesn't obligate me to act. It's just a shadow in the framework. Laurel Crest Consulting still listed in the root directory under Authorized Legacy Oversight, Facilities Continuity. They could purge it if they wanted to, technically, but they won't, because someone up top knows exactly what would happen if they tried to force the hand again. So they let it ping, like a small bow. Every time it arrives, I open it. Read the status fields, watch the checksum logs roll across the screen. It's clean, stable, and humming along exactly as I designed it. I never respond. I never click acknowledge, because I don't need to. The silence is the acknowledgement. They know I'm still there, not in the building, not in the meetings, not in the system dashboards, but deeper, in the bones, in the substructure, in the contract language that built their disaster response around the assumption that someone like me would never be stupid enough to walk away without leaving safeguards behind. And I wasn't. My office now is a different kind of quiet. No badging in, no fluorescent flicker, just a view of the hill country, a soft chair, and a secure terminal humming beneath the desk. Laurel Crest runs light. Just me, one encrypted server, and a locked drawer containing the red fob. Cold, retired, but still tethered to something larger than itself. Sometimes I think about that last walk through the Oak Ridge lobby, the weight of the key ring in my hand, the way Kendra didn't look up until it was too late, and the way no one said thank you, not then, not after, just silence and payout. But the silence is fine. I'm not owed thanks. I'm owed respect. And they pay that every 90 days with one polite ping. That's legacy, not fanfare, not revenge, just the steady, unshakable truth that I built something they couldn't tear down without tearing themselves apart. Kendra's name is gone. But mine? It's still in the system logs, still printed in the advisory clause index, still humming in the quarterly check-ins that no one wants to risk disabling. I didn't burn the place down. I just made sure that if they ever tried to erase me, the walls would remember. And every time that ping hits my inbox, the system whispers what they never had the guts to say out loud. She may be gone, but her fingerprint's still holding the lock.